How to prune your Scots pine depends a lot on the development stage of that pine. This is a fairly well developed pine, and behind the camera, I'll bring it out in a second, is a pine in a very raw state. And this is a very different Scots pine. This came from a grower's field. It was planted in this pot 6 or 7 years ago, and since then I've been grafting branches on. I've been letting this grow very strong and then pruning back, and hoping to get more backbudding, and I prune them in quite different manners. It is now the onset of summer, the pines have extended, the green is starting to settle in, and it's time to prune my pine. Hey, this is Jelle, growing bonsai, and welcome back. What you can notice is that pretty much all the growth around the tree is of equal size, except for a few of these candles that have extended a lot more than the others. The reason for this is quite simple. In early spring, as the candles were extending, I took out all the growing tips that were getting longer than the rest. So at this early spring stage, I went all over the tree and I just reduced long candles. I left the lower candles a little bit longer than the top candles so that the top stays nice and light and the lower branches gain a little bit of energy. This results in a nice homogeneous and even growth. This is very much in contrast to the tree that I have in early development stages. There I am focusing on backbudding, on compacting. Here I'm focusing on equal growth and developing the pads. I didn't thin, I didn't prune, I just let this tree grow. And with that it creates a lot of energy on the branches. If I now do a drastic prune, all that energy needs to go somewhere. And where does it go? Exactly. It goes on buds all along these branches. I'm going to prune this back. And I'll show you how I prune back, how drastic I can be, and in a separate video on the styling of this tree you can see how it is backbudded. Now, pruning a pine that is very much in development and needs a lot of backbudding means that you have to be quite assertive in what you prune off. And in this case I'm going to take off some very long branches. I've decided that I don't need this in the final design, so if I take this off it dramatically increases the amount of sap to the rest of the tree. It is now already a lot smaller, and now I'm going to go through branches like this and I'm going to thin them out. I'm going to decide, well, this is a three-way split. I'm going to remove one of them, and all the new growth I'm just going to leave a few needles. I could go a lot further than this. I could go all the way into the old needles at this stage, but I've decided that in fall I want to start styling this tree. So I'm going to be less drastic than I normally would be. But removing this sort of growth is absolutely critical to get backbudding on the pine. You need to allow it to extend in spring, and then in early summer, middle of summer, prune it back. Always leave sufficient needles on the branches, because Scots pine tends to backbud in between existing needles. So you remove the lower needles, you leave the upper needles, and then that is where you can expect new candles, new buds to form. Now these sort of clusters are typical for a tree in development where you've just left everything on. And the only way to deal with it is to really look inside, decide whether the length that you have on the branch is enough. I have way more than enough length. I actually want backbudding. So here I'm going to be quite drastic. I'm going to say, okay, then I'm going to prune off everything except for the last 2 or so side branches. And you can see it is a lot shorter, and there's 2 side branches. I'm going to remove the low needles, so I only get buds on one side. And here the same thing, this is a side branch, and I'm just going to leave 2 side branches, 1, 2. Everything else is gone. Here also thin out the needle a little bit, leaving just a few. Prune back the candle, prune back the candle, prune back the candle. Doing this consistently throughout the tree leaves a lot more open tree and will stimulate backbudding here in this section. If you're very lucky, also lower down you might get some, but don't count on it. And this I can of course then together with this one later on form into one single foliage pad. And once buds appear lower down, I have a nice compact foliage pad. But that's going to be 2-3 years to get the buds all the way there. But with this I can really start working. Now I have to pay very careful attention with the big pruning cuts that I'm making. This top is never going to be the top, so that's gone. Then one branch lower. This is also above this top and it's not grafted onto anything and I don't need it for grafting. Note I'm leaving little stumps so that I can make interesting deadwood out of this. Now here is a branch. It is quite long, but I also don't think I need it for grafting anytime soon. So this can also go. You see the tree is now a lot smaller already. This foliage I need to thin out, but it is the graft of the top and the back branch. But I don't want the back branch to be this long, but I'll do that with fine scissors. Let's turn the tree around. So this is roughly the new front, right? There are some aphids on these branches. I'm going to spray it as soon as I'm done. Now back to this branch. This is a very nice branch to put some grafts into place. However, there we go, this graft had not taken. This branch isn't nice for grafting and I might want to put a graft here on this branch. So I'm going to keep this for now, but I don't want everything. If I'm going to graft, I'm going to graft with, probably with the end of this branch. So I just have some length. This one, I've just separated this graft. I'm not sure that it is completely stable, so I'm leaving this length. I'm just reducing it a little bit. So these two are still available for grafting if I need it. This, also a grafted branch in place, so I'm going to leave it. This is a back branch. I might need to graft again here. And the same here, right? You just go through the branches and you say, I'm going to drastically reduce the foliage that's on there. I'm not paying too much attention to the needles. Going for bifurcation and short length. Really reducing this photosynthetic capacity and particularly the water need of this plant. And this will in turn aid the tree in backbudding, or actually stimulate the tree to start backbudding more. And now here on this grafted branch are all these extensions, and I'm going to dramatically reduce these to reduce the water need here. So I want this to continue growing, but I also want to reduce the pressure it puts on the existing connection. This now needs to very gently, very slowly become part of the new tree. So this needs to stay alive, but it doesn't need a lot of growth. Right now it really is about getting this established. Always be gentle when you're working on a grafted branch, because it's quite easy still to pull them off even after 2 years. And that is pretty much all the pruning that I'm going to do right now. It is a lot more than I thought I would, but yeah, that is just reality. Now I still have this loose hanging branch down here, which the graft didn't take last year. And I'm now going to take this tiny little end and graft it still here onto the branch and see whether this takes. It's going to be right here. I'm just going to make a tiny little groove here at the bottom of the branch. I'm going to remove the bark at 2/3 of the branch and then I'm just going to put it in position and use a bit of wire to keep it there. I've noticed that for some of my other grafts the pine has pushed the branch out of the groove. So I need to make sure it is quite deep. I could make just an incision and push it in, but I am going to make an incision and make a little of a triangular opening. So it needs to go well through the bark, needs to go into the wood. 2 cuts next to each other. Can't really see where the first one was, so I hope it is deep enough and wide enough. Now peel out this stuff. And removing the bark of course is needed so that the cambium is exposed and it can start to fuse. There's nothing special or unique about this. And then just give it enough time and enough growth to connect. Now for this more mature pine the work is significantly different. What I am going to do with this pine is I'm going to remove all the needles that hang down because they just reduce wind flow. They are not optimally contributing in the energy. And actually I don't really want these branches to fatten up, so I don't want too many needles on there. And I'm just leaving the ones that sit on the top third of the branch. That way reducing old needles by 2/3. And I'm looking at these candles that sit in the tree, and those I want to reduce. Particularly a candle like this is grown quite significantly. So let's take this little branch here as an example of what I'm doing. Let's start off with just removing these older needles that are hanging down. At the same time I look for needles that are unhealthy. There's a needle here with a brown stripe and some yellow dotting. Remove those. Here more needles that are hanging down. Remove those. Individual needles further back I leave in place. And then I look here at this congestion. It's less congested now that I've removed lots of needles, to be honest. But there's one thing that you might notice. There is a candle here. There's a little candle there, and there's a big bud there. So I'm going to remove this big bud because I don't need it. And then I have these two candles, and I'm going to just take this one out, which is not growing. So I can remove that one at the base. And this long candle I'm just going to reduce to the, well, what is it? 10 or so needles that are on the rest as well. Just like that. Some more old needles here in the back that I'm taking out. And in this way I've opened up the crown considerably. Also here some aphids on the tree, so I'm going to have to spray my pines. I haven't sprayed in spring as a matter of principle, but now it is getting too bad. And here the same, you just go in, I remove these old needles at the base, I leave the ones on the top, hoping for some backbudding. You see here, this is backbudding from an old pair of needles from last year. And here I don't think I need to do anything, just check whether there's not a division of 3. Yes, that's what I thought, there is a division of 3. And I can take one of the 3 candles out. And then also the remaining needles that sit around that old candle. Something like this. And here there's quite a few of these old needles. I can just say I'm going to remove all except for 1 pair of needles. 2 pairs of needles, okay. Just like that. So now it is nice and open. The sun can get in and you can get some backbudding. And the long candles have been reduced. So here you have this distinct swelling of the branch around the wire. That's absolutely a bad signal. And the same here for the thicker one. So before I forget where it is, I'm just going to clip it at a place where I have some space, and then gently try to lift the wire out of the groove. It is a little bit tricky. Now you see how deep this has been embedded. So I might actually have to rethink and remove all. But not in this video. This video is not about unwiring pines. This is the moment, however, that it is key to get the wire off. If most of the branches start doing this, then you get too much damage. An individual branch is no problem. I'll cut back at some point. But all over the tree, it's no good. Unfortunately, this is so thick that you can't just unwind it, and you really have to cut it off. And that's difficult once it has settled in so much. Interesting, this might be the culprit. Here there is a crossing wire. And the crossing wire might just have caused less movement for the branch to move sideways, and therefore now it is gone. You get this biting in. Now let me just give this a full cleanup, and then I'll show you what it looks like after the whole cleanup. And I think this is quite reasonable. It's a little bit difficult to see maybe with the background. About a third, maybe half of the needles have been removed. There's still a few yellow needles here and there that I take out, but besides that, most of it is gone. And if you come a little bit closer, you can see there, but also here on the inside, there's tiny little branches. Here there's a new bud, there's the new bud, and that is the result of this maintenance work. Now, most of this branch is still okay when it comes to wire. I've removed most of the offending wires. So off to the rest of the branches and do the rest of the tree just like this. And with that, this pine is also done, ready for the season. I still haven't decided whether I like this front, this, or even this as a front best. But yeah, what you can notice is that this tree, of course, had a lot less material removed than the young plant that is still in development. This just is a cleanup so that airflow can go through, that inner buds can develop, and to make sure that the growth is nice and balanced throughout the tree. I have tried to leave somewhat more needles here on these lower branches than on the top, and in this region I've also removed the buds at the end of the growing tips. With that, I'm holding back the top of the tree and I'm stimulating the lower part to grow stronger. This will now just go back into the sun. I am first going to spray it, of course, against all the aphids. Then I'm giving it a little bit of fertilizer. It hasn't been fertilized yet this year because I don't want thick, fat branches. Now, if you're wondering, when do you do this sort of work? Maybe a very quick recap of how pines grow. In early spring, I leave my pines alone, except for the candles. I look at the candles and I try to even them out, all making them quite short on a more mature tree. On a developing tree, I just leave it alone. Then, if I have control over water, which I don't, you try to hold back on water and fertilizer in early spring. This year I have quite long needles. If you compare that to last year's needles, they're a lot shorter, and that's all due to the rain. We've had a few weeks now of good rain, and before that it was so hot and dry that I've been watering my trees very frequently. So now the needles has gotten long, and yeah, that's it. When do you do this sort of work? Now, there is a balance between getting backbudding on your tree and getting fattening of the branches. So if you allow a pine to just run for the season, you get very, very thick branches. That is okay for a tree in development where you really need the backbudding. So you can easily wait until middle of summer, say July, August, to prune back a young tree, and then you get a massive backbudding response. However, by the time you have thick branches, this tree is nice and light, it has thin branches, and I don't want these branches to flatten up all that much. And that is why in early summer I already do this clean out. So with the other tree I could have waited another month or so before I did the cutback, and I probably would have gotten a much better backbudding response. But I am going to be out of the running for a couple of weeks over summer, and I just want to get all my trees up and running in working order, all sorted out before. Otherwise my wife will have to take care of the pruning. Don't think she'll like that very much. So that's why I did it now. It's not optimal, but it will still work. This of course is for me the ideal time. They have started to grow. I see that the sheets around the needles have turned brown. That means that nowish the growth of the needles will stop. I don't expect them to extend all that much more over the summer. And by fertilizing now, I'm going to trigger budding for the rest of the year. As said, spray against aphids, put it back into the sun. This was Jelle, just a quick pruning of pines, and see you next time. Till then, keep growing bonsai.